Carissa, can you let us know when we've started?
Yep, people are filtering in. We are live.
Oh, okay, great. I'm not seeing anyone.
You won't see the attendees. This is a webinar mode. They're here to listen.
Okay, great. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Jeremy Tejirian, and I run the planning department for the Marin County Community Development Agency. And tonight we are here to talk about changes that we're considering to the policies and regulations around hazards in the local coastal program. I'm joined by Kristin Drumm, Senior Planner. She's the project manager for this. And what I'll do is I'll turn it over to Kristin to give us a presentation, and then we can open it up for questions and answers after the presentation. So Kristin, why don't you take it away?
Okay, I'm going to share my screen now. Oops, that's not it. Try that again. Okay, do you see that?
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Okay. So tonight I'm going to talk about our local coastal program environmental hazard amendments. And with us tonight, hold on a second. I'm trying to advance my screen. Oh, here we go. Sorry for the delay. Thank you for your patience. Anyway, I'm Kristin Drumm, project manager. And with me tonight is Jeremy Tejirian, deputy director. And behind the scenes is Carissa Dorothy, our media tech. And I just wanted to go over a few housekeeping rules. I see, Alita, that you have raised your hand. We will be taking questions following the presentation. If it's regarding a comment on what we're talking about tonight. If not, if it's something else that's really important, then keep your hand raised. If not, please keep your hand down. Thank you. Anyway, so for tonight, the meeting is going to be recorded and we will post it online. Probably you can check back on the website by Monday evening or Monday afternoon. Following the presentation, I'm going to ask that you raise your virtual hand if you have a question or wish to speak. I will call on you. Otherwise, all microphones are otherwise muted. And then we will not be using the chat function, so it will be disabled. If you are, I have a few, if you lower your hand in a Zoom meeting, you can use the following keyboard shortcuts. So in Windows, you press Alt plus Y. And if you have a Mac, you press Option plus Y. You can also raise your hand by clicking the raise hand function in the meeting controls. And if you're calling in the meeting with your phone, you can also raise your hand on a phone call by dialing *9 on your phone's number pad. Then I will receive a notification and you can lower your hand by dialing *9 again. So for tonight, the presentation, we're going to briefly go over the schedule. I'm going to go over a background of the amendments. I'm going to talk about our approach. And then I'm going to spend most of our time talking about the key topics for the amendments. The amendments are occurring in both the land use plan on our coastal zoning code. And then we'll talk about next steps, and then we'll reserve time for your questions and answers. So in terms of the schedule, this is the first of many opportunities to comment and provide input on the proposed changes. We released the public draft in November. Since then, we've been meeting with stakeholder groups to talk about the amendments, and tonight culminates in our webinar meeting. We hope to get your comments by the end of December, and then in January, we will revise the public review draft for the Planning Commission workshops that will occur. We hope to bring the Planning Commission recommended version of the amendments to the Board of Supervisors in March, and then submit to the Coastal Commission in April. The Coastal Commission hearing to certify the amendments, which means the land use plan must be consistent with the Coastal Act and also the IP. So I just want to briefly talk about what is the Local Coastal Program. The Local Coastal Program, or LCP, was established by the Coastal Act. The Coastal Act was established by voter initiative in 1970 through Proposition 20, which the legislature enacted in January 1977. The Coastal Act is intended to maximize public access and recreation, protect coastal resources, prioritize coastal dependent uses, agriculture, and other things. It is the blueprint for development along the coast. And the Coastal Commission was created to administer the Coastal Act and the LCPs. The LCP framework tailors the Coastal Act requirements to provide flexibility for local communities, and it is the blueprint for development along the coast. The Local Coastal Program includes the Land Use Plan, which we call the LUP. The LUP contains the policies and an implementation plan, which we also call the Coastal Zoning Code, which implements the land use plan through policies, through ordinances and zoning maps. So to give you background and talk about why we are here today. So the original LCP included Unit 1, which was certified in 1981, and Unit 2, which was certified in 1982. Planning staff began a comprehensive amendment to the LCP starting in 2008. This process involved significant stakeholder outreach, and throughout the amendment process, staff engaged with the Coastal Commission staff. And there have been several public workshops and hearings, including hearings with the Coastal Commission in 2014 and 2016. In 2016, the county brought a package of LCP amendments to the Coastal Commission. The Coastal Commission certified the amendments on the commission. The county accepted various suggested modifications. Meanwhile, the county withdrew the environmental hazards portion of the submittal because of various unresolved issues. The county continued to work with the Coastal Commission to resolve these unresolved issues. And in 2018, the Board of Supervisors approved the Coastal Commission modifications, but elected to hold off on making the amendments effective until the hazards amendments or elements were completed. They want a board elected to wait until the hazards were completed, but issues still remain. So in 2021, the board went ahead and directed that the certified LCP become effective without the updated hazards policies and standards. So this is the document that now governs the coast and is currently in place. So today we are circling back and initiating the process to update the LCP environmental hazards element. So we realize that we cannot continue what we have been doing in the past and spend 10 more years updating the environmental hazards with a wholesale overhaul of the hazards chapter. This time, our approach is to work with a small and focused set of amendments that are feasible and realistic, given our conversations with the Coastal Commission. We will be carrying out the environmental hazards amendments in 2025. At the same time, we will soon be bringing forward a separate set of amendments to implement the housing element policies, also in 2025. These amendments will be followed by a wish list of general updates and suggestions, which will occur in 2026. And future updates and amendments will be on a 2-year cycle to allow us to make refinements. The goal is for continuous improvement over the long term, similar to how we do amendments for the code for the rest of the county. We hope this phased approach is more favorable and realistic alternative to a time-consuming and comprehensive update that we have previously done. So with that, I'm going to jump into some of the key changes that we've made to the land use plan. Two key land use plan topics include, first, we define environmental hazards, and second, we map sea level rise inundation. These two topic areas set the stage for all development in the coastal zone. So Coastal Act 30253 requires new development to be sited away from coastal hazards to minimize risks to the property in areas of high geologic flood and fire hazards. The current LCP defines hazards that includes shoreline and bluff erosion, earthquake zones, flooding, steep slopes, areas subject to tsunami run-up, landslides, and liquefaction, among others. The proposed amendment would now formally include sea level rise, which is currently not addressed. As part of this, the LCP would also include a series of sea level rise inundation maps. The current LCP only maps flooding based on the FEMA special flood hazard zone maps, which only account for historical flooding, not climate change. The maps show the FEMA flood zone, shown here as in the red hatch. The blue shaded areas are where 3.3 feet of sea level rise is modeled to occur. And currently, a structure located in the FEMA flood zone may elevate up to the base flood elevation. With the change, a structure could elevate to the FEMA base flood elevation plus the freeboard elevation of 3 feet for sea level rise. Another key land use change would promote nature-based adaptation, such as dune enhancement and wetland restoration over shoreline armoring. This is important because current LCP policies only address shoreline protection through hard shoreline armoring, such as revetments or seawalls. We now know through studies conducted through CSMART and the Stinson ARC project that nature-based adaptation is preferred over armoring because it may not only enhance coastal resources and public access, but may also be the least environmentally damaging and the preferred method to alleviate coastal hazards. Nature-based adaptation offers a more resilient approach to climate change than coastal armoring. And nature-based alternatives to hard shoreline hardening must be thoroughly analyzed and proven infeasible before hard shoreline armoring can be considered for approval through a coastal permit. So another key policy change has been requested by the Coastal Commission staff to allow for building height increases along Tomales Bay. The Coastal Commission has requested this change because the Coastal Commission, not the county, retains permit jurisdiction over properties along the seaward side of Highway 1 along Tomales Bay. The Coastal Commission retains coastal permit jurisdiction over development proposed on tidelands, submerged lands, and public trust lands. Since current LCP policies limit heights of homes along Tomales Bay to 15 feet, the Coastal Commission cannot approve, oh, I'm sorry, whoops, okay. Since current heights are limited to 15 feet, the Coastal Commission cannot approve any height increases to adapt to sea level rise. Therefore, they have asked us to increase the height limit. Many of the buildings along Tomales Bay are constructed with bulkheads such as piers, revetments, and retaining walls. Current policies also limit the repair of these existing bulkheads. These two changes would give homeowners the flexibility to not only improve their bulkheads, but also increase the building heights to adapt for sea level rise, as long as the elevation does not enlarge or expand the structure being elevated, and must verify that it can be served by adequate public infrastructure and utilities for at least 20 years. We are aware that increasing building heights may have an impact on visual resources and community character, but this will need to be balanced and weighed against the protection of vulnerable assets such as homes. Another important change would apply to areas in Stinson Beach that are in the 100-year floodplain of Easkoot Creek. Easkoot Creek, which runs through the town of Stinson Beach and out to the Bolinas Lagoon, is prone to flooding. A current moratorium exists that prohibits new development from occurring within the creek's 100-year floodplain. The amendments would delete this prohibition while the flood control zone comes up with a long-term solution to address the flooding. In the meantime, this change would allow homeowners to adapt to flooding, as the potential for coastal flooding from storm surge and sea level rise and flooding from the creek is well documented. We know that water and wastewater systems in the coast can be vulnerable to hazards from climate change. And we know that many coastal communities depend on on-site septic systems and private wells. We know that an increase in sea level rise could cause groundwater tables to rise, or may cause saltwater intrusion. Rising water tables could affect the performance of some septic systems. Current policies do not address this issue. Given these conditions, proposed amendments recommend protecting water and wastewater treatment facilities, including public and private wells, public sewer treatment plants, and private septic systems in vulnerable locations from long-term effects of sea level rise, and that communities should consider alternatives to develop such facilities in a safer location. For example, the Stinson Beach Water District has done background studies looking at preliminary adaptation strategies for a centralized community wastewater system, as shown here. And we also know that Marin's coastal zone is vulnerable to catastrophic wildfires. And current policies limit defensible space and fuel modification activities for wildfire safety if they occur in an environmentally sensitive habitat area, or ESHA, or the ESHA buffer. The proposed amendments would still require vegetation management activities for wildfire protection to avoid an ESHA. However, we know that there are instances when it is infeasible to avoid doing such activities in an ESHA. When this is the case, you could do some activity in the ESHA as long as such efforts would minimize and reduce coastal resource impacts. This change is an attempt to strike a balance between wildfire safety objectives while continuing to maintain consistency with the Coastal Act ESHA requirements for vegetation management. The change maintains existing restrictions while providing flexibility for wildfire protection. So now switching over to our coastal zoning code or implementation plan, or IP. So a primary change to the code would allow the elevation of structures to adapt for flooding and sea level rise by modifying height standards for areas in the newly mapped coastal zone inundation area. This change implements the land use policy change made to the land use plan we first talked about. There is a current maximum height limit of structures to 25 feet. In many cases, this height limit would not allow for the elevation in areas vulnerable to flooding. As a result, the change would increase the height limit to 30 feet to provide flexibility to accommodate for flooding from sea level rise. The change would also eliminate the need for a variance and design review approval for the height increase. This means the structure could elevate to the FEMA base flood elevation plus the freeboard elevation of 3 feet for sea level rise for a total of 5 feet. This change would also allow a change to in the finished floor elevation, which would allow the floor of a structure to be elevated since current language restricts this in certain areas. We know this has been an issue in Stinson Beach and Seadrift. These changes are designed to remove barriers in order to adapt to sea level rise. On the flip side, there is new language that would impose a number of conditions onto projects approved in areas subject to hazards. It would require applicants to internalize any risk associated with their project, such as include the assumption of hazardous risk, prohibit new armoring to protect the development in the event it becomes threatened by coastal hazards, include triggers for the future relocation if it is threatened by coastal hazards in the future, ensure the development does not interfere with public trust resources, require real estate disclosures and recordation of deed restriction to provide additional notice to future property owners about the coastal hazard and the coastal development permit requirements, and prohibit any new armoring to protect it in the event it becomes threatened by coastal hazards. There are several important points to keep in mind as you review this language. The language is from past coastal development permits and that we have received from the Coastal Commission. And these requirements from the Coastal Commission have been the same. They have not changed their language. It's been like a template they have been using in their coastal permits. So we have included the language here straight from a typical coastal permit. Second, there have been several requests from folks who have looked at this language to change the wording. but we have resisted making changes to demonstrate the types of conditions the Coastal Commission includes in their coastal development permit requirements. We want to highlight the language that the Coastal Commission has been imposing on typical coastal permits. These conditions could be controversial. We are not wedded to this language, but we know the Coastal Commission has consistently requested this language when they have weighed in on projects. This gets the conversation started at the local level. Third, we take the viewpoint that these permit conditions are a compromise that we are accepting to assure that property owners are benefiting from being allowed to exceed the height limits to protect their homes. But that does not mean it cannot be changed. So even if your home may not be affected, your neighbor's home might be. So as a result, we welcome your comments and feedback on this language. And as you may be aware, we have had ongoing discussions with Coastal Commission staff regarding how to define existing, which has implications for when shoreline protection devices can be approved to protect an existing structure. The current interpretation by the Coastal Commission defines an existing structure to mean a structure that existed prior to the effective date of the Coastal Act, which is 1977. However, our interpretation of an existing structure is at the time of application for a coastal development permit. The courts are currently hearing this case, so we shall see how that plays out. In the meantime, there is a current definition of new development in the code. This definition says that public access shall be provided for new development projects, and goes on to define what is new development and what new development includes. The amendments modify this definition to remove the public access reference. However, the definition maintains the language defining what new development includes. This is important because by defining what is new development, we have also conversely defined what is existing. The Coastal Commission has not yet commented on this language, so we do not know what they think of this approach. So another key change would require development to be sited to avoid coastal hazards to the degree feasible. The current LCP says development must be sited and designed to minimize risks. There is a very strict standard and offers no flexibility. The proposed amendment, as shown here, says that development subject to hazards shall be sited to avoid hazards as feasible. The as feasible addition is a key. However, if flood hazards cannot be avoided, then flood risk should be eliminated by constructing new habitable area above the sea level rise elevation, raising legal non-conforming development may be approved without the need for a variance to setback or height requirements, as long as the extent of other nonconformities are not expanded. And services such as, oops, keep doing that. Go back. My mouse is acting a little freaky. Well, let me just continue talking. You won't need a variance for setback or height requirements as long as the extent of other nonconformities are not expanded. And then services such as water, wastewater, electricity, and gas shall be sited and designed to avoid impacts from flooding and to protect coastal resources to the maximum extent feasible. This new language provides flexibility, more flexibility than the current language, while still protecting coastal resources. So now to the slide at hand. Earlier this year, the Coastal Commission denied an appeal and approved a new single-family dwelling on a vacant lot in Stinson Beach. Well, without going into the project details, the denial approved a 1,300 square foot house with a septic system with coastal dunes. The project was approved despite the fact that the LCP prohibits development in coastal dunes and ESHA. The project is located entirely within a high-risk flood zone and on top of coastal dunes, and its septic system places a risk to water quality impacts adjacent to a marine reserve and popular recreation area. This project demonstrated that we do not have a standard in the LCP for when this situation might occur, however infrequent. As a result, new language has been added to establish a 1,200 square foot building area limit for when it is necessary to approve development to avoid a constitutional taking, like the example I just described. While this is not a frequent occurrence, it does happen. This modification would now provide a standard of 1,200 square feet where none previously existed. Regarding the 1,200 square foot size limit, there is currently no regulatory basis for this size. It could be bigger, it could be smaller. Instead, the size is based on the statewide size standard for an ADU or accessory dwelling unit as the minimum necessary to avoid a taking. So we ask your thoughts on this particular. What do you think about it? Okay, trying to just jump to my next slide. For some reason, I'm going to talk about next steps while I try to move forward. So we're going to make revisions to the amendments based on your feedback. We hope to do that. We hope to get your comments by the end of December. And in January, we will refine the draft and bring it to the Planning Commission. And we will have a Planning Commission workshop, most likely January or February, a Planning Commission hearing later in the winter. We will then bring it to the Board of Supervisors in the spring, and then the Coastal Commission in the fall, summer or fall. So at this time, we are opening the format for questions and answers. So I'm going to stop sharing and I will call on people. And as I mentioned earlier, once I call you, you may unmute. So let me see if I can read this.
Thanks, Kristin. Appreciate that presentation. I see a number of people who are raising their hands. Let's just start with the beginning one. Carissa, can you allow John to speak?
Hi.
John, can you speak? Great, thank you.
Yeah, hi. I'm sitting here in Tiburon
Okay.
with sea level rise sloshing around my ankles, and in the Greenwood Cove area, if you're familiar with Tiburon. The question I have is, of course, you're talking about coastal issues. What about like things like that we have experienced sea level rise in Richardson Bay, right across the street from me? I assume all of this covers Richardson Bay. Is that true?
No, that's not true, actually. So
Aha.
thanks, excellent question, because I think you're right. Sea level rise is a phenomenon which is going to affect so many people in so many parts of the county. But the local coastal program only covers the coastal zone out in West Marin. It has
Coastal
nothing,
Commission.
nothing. It has no, yeah, it has no effect in the interior or along the shoreline of the bay.
So there's no restrictions whatsoever, really.
Well, I mean, there's other issues around sea level rise around the bay, but this set of regulatory changes only affects the coastal zone.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, thank you. Next, I see Marcus. Hi, Marcus.
Hi, Jeremy. Kristin, thank you for that very thorough presentation. This is my first time attending one of these meetings. I'm a longtime Bolinas resident homeowner. Um, Specific questions are around the 3.3 foot number. I wondered what the source is for that number. And the second question I have was regarding the nature versus armoring proviso described. I'm wondering how the council plans to prioritize one solution over another, against, homeowners, safety of their buildings and property.
Yeah, thanks. You're getting to a key point. First of all, the 3.3 comes from projections from the state. There's a what's called Our Coast, Our Future is essentially uh, uh, a group of scientists that are doing projections of the effects of sea level rise. And this projection is based on inundation by 2060. And it's a widely used projection model. And so that's where this comes from. It's not that the county made it up, it's we're using state data. So I think that's where that number came from. I think you're also asking some really tough questions about how to prioritize the approach that's best for a particular site, and it's not easy. There is evidence, though, that nature-based solutions are better for the environment, and in often cases they're actually less expensive as well. And because of that, the general approach is to at least require that people look at nature-based solutions, and only if nature-based solutions will not be effective should they move on to these more kind of hard seawalls and those types of approaches. So it's not to say that you can't use those types of approaches. It's just that if you can make a nature-based approach work, then that's the best way to go. Was that all, Marcus?
Oh, no, I thought I had to raise my hand again. So, so in Bolinas in particular, and I don't want to make it the Bolinas show because I understand there are residents from other regions on the call. There is a seawall reconstruction effort that seems to have been halted. Is the halting of that, and maybe you don't know, is the halting of that repair on that section of seawall related to the pending resolution of a nature-based solution?
I think that is being reviewed by the Coastal Commission. Uh, Um, I don't believe so. We're not reviewing that, but I don't believe it's pending a nature-based solution. When you are building seawalls, the question is, what can you do to mitigate any adverse effects? And so maybe that's what's at issue there.
All right. My last question, and thank you for giving me so much time, is, with the provisos related to buildings being allowed to be built at a higher level. If there is, like, I've got a building that's pretty old, and it is below what is the current like minimum height for flood zone. Would I be allowed to just apply for a simple variance and elevate my structure under the
Well,
same proviso?
Um, so what we're trying to avoid actually is forcing people to apply for a variance. And you can do that now under the current code. But we want to give people a little bit extra space to be able to raise their homes without going through that process. Now, there's different height standards in different parts of the county, but in general, there's a 25-foot height standard throughout the coastal zone. So basically what we're saying is for most of those cases, we're saying instead of sticking to that 25-foot height limit in areas that are subject to flooding and inundation, allow people a little bit of extra room to go up to 30 feet rather than 25. That would take account of that 3.3 that's in the state projections, plus some additional room there. So it's trying to give people more flexibility, remove some of that red tape to be able to protect your homes.
And would this also apply
Jeremy?
to homes that are over the water?
So most of the homes, not all, but most of the homes that are over the water are along Tomales Bay. And so
I'm thinking of
same,
Bolinas in particular.
oh,
like,
okay.
Wharf Road homes.
Yes, it would still apply.
So, Marcus, we have a series of maps which show this coastal inundation zone for all the communities. And there are several maps for Bolinas. So I will point you to our website where we have a link to the coastal zone inundation maps to see where this zone is covered. They may be hard to read, and you may not be able to tell. And if you can't, you can always call and I can show you and look it up on a bigger map.
If you're over the
So,
water, I'm pretty sure you can tell.
yeah, because not all of Bolinas is in the coastal zone inundation area.
So Marcus, I think we're
definitely,
going to move on. We're going to move on to the next question, if that's okay. So Kathleen, go ahead, please.
Thanks, Jeremy. Can you review briefly what the proposed requirements are regarding Calle Arroyo in Stinson Beach? As you know, I'm president of the Village Association, and we have a number of concerns, and I'm sure we'll be corresponding with you before the month is out. But just again, what's the plan with Calle Arroyo?
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing that up. This has come up before, and I correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think that you're probably keying off of one particular section in the amendments where it talks about what the requirements would be for projects that are in areas that may be inundated, and then there's requirements for deed restrictions and removal of development. Am I come on the right track here?
Yes, in addition, Calle Arroyo is mentioned specifically
Yeah,
with the general concept that if it becomes impassable, everybody tears their house down and leaves.
yeah.
So,
So if I could just explain, and I'd like to apologize as well, because mea culpa, what I did when I was putting these together was I pulled all the conditions of approval from the various projects that we've received comments from the Coastal Commission over the years, and they're remarkably similar. There's almost no difference in between any of them, but occasionally they'll have a specific mention of something related to that specific project. And so when I was copying and pasting, I copied and pasted out of one of those that was specifically about that Calle Arroyo. So my apologies. That is in reality supposed to be a general discussion of roadways that may become impassable. But in this case, it was just pulled from particular comments on a particular project that were in Stinson Beach. So we're certainly going to change that to be more general if we decide to keep this section at all.
oh, well, I like the second. Will there be new language to review before the process grinds on into January and March, or is it going to be
Yeah.
part of just a general revision to be released?
Well, so what we're going to do is, like Kristin mentioned, we're asking for everybody to give us written comments by the end of the month. And then what we're going to do is review all those comments plus what we've heard during our various meetings with people, and then go in and make a bunch of changes to the current draft to create what we call the Planning Commission review draft. So that review draft is then going to be reviewed by the Planning Commission, probably at a couple of different hearings. And of course, there'll be another opportunity for you to comment on that next draft. Now, I should say the Planning Commission will ask for more changes. You'll have the opportunity to comment on those. And then before they send it to the Board of Supervisors, there'll be even more changes. So there's going to be continuous kind of iterations. But general comments that we receive now will kind of follow through. So we'll try and address as many of those as we can before sending it to the Planning Commission. But yes, there will be another draft for you to review.
And quickly to summarize, if I got it right, there are going to be there are going to be proposed or new changes, new draft. We'll get to see that, but the comments at that point will go just to the Planning Commission, or will we have another mini version of this process where you talk to us?
It would go just to the Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission would have a workshop at that point. We believe that it's important. I mean, we're not the ones who would make any recommendation to the board. We think it's really important for the Planning Commission to hear from the community directly. So we want to get in front of them. And we want to get some of these comments and some of these ideas in front of them. So there's going to be a workshop at the Planning Commission where we raise some of these issues and hopefully get some good comments. And then following their direction, we'll bring back a version that hopefully they'll be willing to recommend to the Board of Supervisors.
And I'll finish quickly. So you will see a letter from the Village Association in your time frame, and I'll memorialize that there's an expected change and alteration to that, but I'll still put some of our concerns in there.
Yeah, please
So
do. Thank you
thanks.
so much. Yeah. I think the next one is Mimi Murphy.
Hi, thank you to both Kristin and Jeremy. I was in on the Stinson Beach Village meeting also, and I have to say this second go around, I'm understanding so much better. So I really appreciate you guys continuing to have these meetings. So thank you so much. I really, my main question was what Kathleen just said, but what I would add to it, because we have a home in Seadrift, and if Calle de Arroyo was put out to pasture, we couldn't get there. So that was a concern, but sounds like you guys are addressing that. And as and when you do, it would be great if there was some clarity as to what might be the situation if the county were to exit. Does it mean, the ocean surge too many times in a year or whatever? So that was just my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mimi. Appreciate that. Steve Kinsey.
Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you for this presentation this evening. A couple questions that I have has to do with the way that the code currently says that if more than 50% of any portion of a building, so its foundation, its roof, its walls change, then it needs to be considered new development. So with this idea of raising the buildings, will you be making a modification or an exemption for that?
Yeah, I'd have to actually look in detail at that. It'd be great if you could actually include that in a written comment, because I would need to look more carefully. I mean, it seems like what you're saying is that to raise a home, that's automatically going to trigger a coastal development permit, and regardless of the location of that home. I don't know if I think that's true. Now, there certainly are certain areas where those the typical kind of exemption don't apply. So for example, if it's on a beach, if it's very close to a bluff, sometimes those things, because of the location, will trigger a coastal development permit. But if you could put that in a comment, I'd appreciate it, so we can key that out more carefully and make sure that we're able to be responsive.
Yeah, I certainly will. Secondly, you talked about the opportunity for community wastewater systems, but for those folks in Stinson Beach or in other areas where it may take years, decades, forever to create a community wastewater system, will that be a limiting factor for being able to raise their house if they're not able to make any changes to their septic system?
So the basic approach that we're following is to give people more options to adapt. And so that's why we're bringing up this issue that, if there is a possibility of creating, a wastewater system or other public facilities, then it's a good idea to locate those in the safest place possible. We're not trying to prohibit people from adapting to flooding or sea level rise, except in that portion that we raised previously, where we are following, or we're kind of surfacing actually, the requirements that the Coastal Commission has requested we place on coastal development permits, and that's really about future development.
Right, and I follow that. And then finally, given the opportunity to raise a building by say up to 5 feet to get coastal flooding protection, will there be some language that allows for minor footprint changes above and beyond the existing footprint to accommodate a change in stairs or other ways to get into that building?
Boy, questions are so detailed. I don't know if we thought that through. Actually, that's a good point. Yeah, we may need to take a closer look at that.
Right. I really appreciate this. We will provide comments, and God is in the details, and especially if God has to report to the Coastal Commission. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Okay, Kirk.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Yeah, so I had a couple questions. So could you explain in a little bit more detail the deed restrictions? And I know when I've listened to another presentation you gave to some people in Bolinas, so I know some of this is coming via the Coastal Commission, but I guess I don't really understand why the county would want to enshrine these as well, or put them into place as well. So I'm trying to get a better understanding of what's happening there and what the implications of those are.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for raising that issue. That's an important issue to bring up. So maybe I can explain the thinking. We obviously work on lots of coastal development permits, and a lot of those are in areas that may be subject to flooding or sea level rise. And typically what we do is when we get those applications, we send them to the Coastal Commission, and we get comments back from the Coastal Commission in those cases. Now, those comments are remarkably similar across the board when they're in these circumstances. And because of that, what we believe is that this is really what the Coastal Commission wants to see. So what we're trying to do is, instead of trying to ask everybody to sort through all the comments we receive, we're trying to surface that so that all of you understand exactly what it is that the Coastal Commission is asking us to require of you. So it's really trying to surface that. That's why I'm just copying and pasting from their comments and putting it in. Now, it's important because we think this is going to be an issue going on when we get before the Coastal Commission. We're expecting them to look for these. So we want to make sure that it's surfaced so all of you have an opportunity to look at exactly what they're asking for and give us your comments now so that we're prepared to see whether or not we can work something out with the Coastal Commission. Maybe we make changes to this. Maybe it's okay the way that it is, or maybe it's not okay. Maybe this is just not a good enough deal. Maybe we need to rethink this and not include it. We're not wedded to this. We just want to make it evident and clear to all of you so that we can get your input before taking it before the Planning Commission and then the board and then eventually to the Coastal Commission.
And could you give a high-level summary of what those typical deed restrictions are, or what an example case would be?
Well, sure. Yeah. I mean, you're saying deed restriction, and I think it's important to have to point out that this would be a deed restriction, but the actual substance of the requirements, I think, is at least as important. So if you look on the beginning on page 85 of the copy of the amendments, what you'll see is it says coastal hazards requirements. And so if it's a development project that requires a coastal development project permit within these certain areas that are mapped, as Kristin was mentioning those maps, then it's going to be subject to a number of these different standards. So for example, it will say no future armoring for that portion of the development that required a coastal development permit. You can't be in the public trust area. You have to assume risks. And then there's a whole set of requirements for coastal hazard responses. And this has already been brought up once before. If there's unsafe conditions, then the development allowed through the coastal development permit would need to be removed. Please take a look at those I'm not going to read it all out right now, but please take a look at the actual wording in there so that you understand what it would mean in your particular case.
Okay, and then just one last follow-up question on the this 1,200-foot restriction for new development. I still don't think I'm fully understanding. So this is like the context when that would arise and what's happening there.
Sure. Yeah, sure. So the county has very strict requirements for development. And we're not allowed in normal cases to approve development that does not meet those requirements. However, we recognize that in some cases, imposing those requirements to the full extent of the law would mean that a person would not be able to develop their property at all. In that case, there is grounds for what's called a taking. In other words, the county deprives someone of all economic use of their property, which is unconstitutional. And so what was built into our local coastal program was this ability to make certain findings around takings to allow that development to occur to avoid this constitutional issue. It's essentially like a constitutional safety valve. So that's what's in our code right now. The issue is that there's no clear understanding of what is the threshold that would be acceptable to allow someone to develop in a place where they normally wouldn't be able to develop for the county to avoid that kind of lawsuit. So we're proposing to establish a threshold. Now, like Kristin said, we chose 1,200 square feet of building area. There's nothing magical about that, but it is a kind of standard floor area or building area amount that is used for other purposes. And so that's what we're proposing right now.
Okay, great. Thank you. That all makes sense. So thanks for your responses.
Okay, Patrick. Can you unmute, Patrick? Almost. Try it again. There you go. Okay.
I wanted to ask about the language that refers specifically to Easkoot Creek. This whole thing seems to discourage development, except, maintaining your property. And yet there's language that seems specifically to talk about development along Easkoot Creek. Are you expecting new construction there, or does somebody have property they want to develop and haven't been allowed to? Is that a question, anything you can comment on?
Well, so right now there's basically a moratorium on any development along Easkoot Creek, which is generally not. I mean, that's problematic for us to prevent any development. So what we're saying with this change is actually people have the flexibility to develop, but they do have to meet the standards for raising their homes above flood elevations and other standards to protect their homes. So it's providing some more flexibility. We're not really anticipating that there's a lot of development that's going to occur, but there may be some, and we want to give people the ability to meet the standards and build in accordance with those standards.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, Clint, if you can unmute.
Thank you. I'm wondering if you could provide a little more clarity on the effect of vegetation clearing for reducing the propensity for wildfire in environmentally sensitive habitat areas, such as if there were a a large stand of a rare plant, or if there were willow trees growing in a wetland. I have observed that the willow trees growing along Highway 1, just south of Point Reyes Station, where it crosses the fault where Tomales Bay is, just just south, just east of south of Tomales Bay. A lot of those willows had been cut, but they were already pretty far from the road, so I didn't understand why they were cut. So I guess what I'm saying is it's a gray area, how you protect the Isha and how you mitigate for potential wildfire.
Yes, I think you're right. I think it is a gray area, and it's very case specific. I'm not familiar with this specific case that you're bringing up, but there are cases where it is absolutely possible to meet the defensible space requirements around your existing home, even if you're next to an area that's environmentally sensitive, without damaging that area. You may have to cut back, but it won't actually do any long-term damage. However, there are other times when it's really just impossible to meet those requirements and protect your property without doing something that will affect that environmentally sensitive habitat area. And so this provides a little bit more flexibility to be able to do that. However, within that flexibility, there's still going to be a requirement that the damage be the absolute minimum, and that there be mitigation measures and restoration necessary to make sure that the development continues to be environmentally sustainable over the long term.
Thank you very much. And also there's the home hardening aspect too, that could be really helpful in reducing effects on Isha. I forgot to ask that.
Yeah, that's the first way to go, because home hardening can take you a long way, and generally that's within the existing footprint, so that's not going to have any adverse effects on environmentally sensitive areas. It's just when you get into the vegetation management that the risk goes up a little bit.
Thank you very much.
Sure. John. Doing it. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, there we go. Thanks for taking another question. What's the difference between Tomales Bay and Richardson Bay, definition-wise, based on your authority?
Well, Tomales Bay is within the coastal zone,
Right.
as defined by the Coastal Act, and Richardson
Okay.
Bay is not.
It is not, right. It's its own authority, Regional Bay Authority. That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Okay, second quick question. I think I know the answer. What's the definition of armoring?
Yeah. Well, it's really kind of hard surfaces. And there's a lot of, you can talk about nature-based, you can talk about hardscape. Those are kind of two of the, how you bookend those things. There's a lot in between. So armoring generally refers to that harder kind of seawall where you're talking about concrete, that kind of stuff. So generally that's our armoring. You could also consider other more nature-based approaches to be armoring to some degree, but it's really more referring to those like seawalls and that kind of hardscape.
Yeah, that's where we're headed. Speaking on behalf of the Flood Zone 4 here in Tiburon, we're about ready to, because of the the sea level rise, and only sea level rise, plus, of course, king tides, we're not that far from cutting off access to downtown Tiburon here pretty soon, given the seasonal flooding. Okay, well, we're thinking about seawalls, and you've answered my questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks, John. Fritz.
Howdy, thank you for taking me, and thank you for your time. My question is, given the work that's being done down at the Bolinas Y to raise that roadway and preserve access, is there consideration for similar work to be done to preserve other roadways in the coastal zone, and specifically Calle del Arroyo?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. It's been raised before. And I wish I could answer that. I don't really know. So the planning division essentially deals with zoning and regulation of private real estate. We do not really do land management like a parks department, or capital improvements like, Caltrans or the Department of Public Works. So this is really about what people can do with their private property. Now, to a certain extent, we do regulate public property as well in terms of capital improvements, but we regulate that. We don't actually bring forward any kind of capital improvements. We're a regulatory agency, not an agency that actually builds anything. So I'm sorry, I just can't really answer the questions about capital improvements in the future.
Thank you.
Lawrence. Can you unmute? Almost got it there, I think. Looks like you're having some trouble unmuting.
I'm trying.
Did you get? Oh, there it is. There. Okay.
I was wondering whether or not I'm correct in my understanding that Calle de Arroyo is a county road.
I think so. Yeah, I think it is.
Who's responsible for maintaining a county road as a matter of law?
If it's a county maintained road, then the county is responsible for maintaining it. If it's a privately maintained road, then well, it depends how it's maintained. If it's a road dedicated to a particular subdivision, then the people within that subdivision are responsible for maintaining it. If it's a private road that's really just between neighbors, then those neighbors are responsible for maintaining it.
Which is Calle de Arroyo?
Like I said, I think Calle de Arroyo is county maintained.
Well, why doesn't the county maintain it?
Well, like I said, I work for the planning department. I can't really speak to capital improvements.
Well, somebody's responsible, I assume.
I assume so.
Is that supposed to be a satisfactory answer? I mean, I don't mean to be hurt or impolite, but nothing seems to get done when something is supposed to be done.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Lawrence. I mean, I can't really answer that. We're dealing with LCP amendments related to zoning requirements, and we just don't work on capital improvements that way.
Which department does?
I think the Department of Public Works.
Would you be kind enough to inform them of our inquiry?
Of course. Happy
Thank
to
you
do so.
very much.
Yeah. Bridger.
Here we go. My question refers to the development along the Tomales Bay shoreline, and the current LCP limit is 15 feet of height. And this proposed amendment would raise that height for existing structures. And Kristin, I believe, said there is a trade-off between raising the height to get protection from sea level rise and the visual impact of a higher building, a higher structure, and that would affect the assessment of community character. Now, if I heard her correctly, she said this trade-off needs to be weighed, the benefit of protection versus the effect on visual character. The question is, how will this weighing be undertaken, and what standards will apply to that process?
So the standards that would apply would be the standards of a coastal development permit, but not a variance. So in other words, there are standards in the coastal development permit findings related to visual effects, for example, which could include effects to views, but you would not have to go through the specific findings for are required under a variance procedure. So it's not like there's no review. It's just that the additional hurdle of going through a variance would not be required.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's a lot of people still here, and there's very few actual questions. Does anybody have any questions? Kevin, thank you.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can. Yeah, thanks.
Great. Yes, my concern is about armoring dunes. And it seems to me if the armoring is not natural, it has a big potential to negatively impact adjacent dunes and properties. And I'm wondering if this, provision to allow armoring is taking that into consideration.
Yes, it is taking that into consideration. And you're right, it does have the effect or can have an effect that's negative on surrounding properties and on the surrounding beach and on the surrounding dunes. So that's why it's one of those things where it may be possible under certain circumstances. However, the requirement is always to look at more nature-based um, uh, approaches rather than starting out with this hardscape armoring. And that may mean constructing new dunes or somehow otherwise protecting those dunes. That would be preferable from an environmental perspective than building new seawalls or the hardscape armoring.
But all these amendments are only for individual houses. It's not looking at the entire dune. Is that correct? And how we might improve the entire dune.
Well, I don't know that I would say
For
that actually. It's
example.
not necessarily for an individual house. I mean, you could come up with a larger project that was all about protecting dunes, rebuilding dunes, and this policy would promote that kind of a project actually.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Lauren.
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Hi. So we built a house, or we remodeled a house on the lagoon in Seadrift 2 years ago. And we were among the first people that had to put the deed restriction that the Coastal Commission had just implemented into our deed, saying that on this man-made lagoon, we would not armor. And which just seemed a little counterintuitive anyway. But my question is, I understand these deed restrictions are happening on these individual properties. And I also hear these questions about the roadway into these cayes and Seadrift. And if we're being prevented from armoring our properties or protecting them, what assurances are we getting, or what updates are we getting about what the county is doing to help mitigate the flood risk that we are getting, or we might be getting? I know there was a lot of vulnerability studies that were going on, and I haven't heard out of that what things they look to implement to help these homes.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for raising that. So I'm going to assume that you had to actually go through the Coastal Commission's process rather than the county's process for your coastal development permit. Is that correct?
We could have done either one, but we did end up going through the Coastal Commission process. Yes.
Yeah. So because you went through the Coastal Commission's process, they imposed these conditions that I'm discussing right now. However, when applicants have gone through the county's process and the Coastal Commission has requested that we impose these conditions, we have refused. And the reason is because there's no policy grounds for us to impose those conditions. So the question now is, should the county start imposing those conditions as well? So you're one of the people who has actually had those conditions imposed. So I don't want to mix apples and oranges because it's a little bit different. Now you also asked a question like what is being done? Well, you live in Stinson Beach, and that is an area where we're doing some additional research. We're working on a study called the Stinson Arc, and hopefully check out the website for that. It's really a very interesting study, and we're going to be coming out with another report about that. And that talks about different pathways that may be followed to try to protect the beach and the community of Stinson Beach as sea level rise just increasingly gets worse.
Yeah, so I have been following that, and I've seen that there's been a lot of studies and research being done, but I guess it's at what point do people start to make some decisions on what they're going to actually implement. I mean, we had some serious erosion of the dunes and the beach itself. The place is becoming passable, leading from the spit to the rest of the beach towards Stinson Beach, heading, I guess, that north. So I'm just wondering, at what point are they looking to actually stop researching and maybe say this, here's what we're going to be doing? I don't know if there's a plan. And in that, I'm kind of hoping, but it doesn't sound like you're so sure, that the roadway, the Calle de Oro, is going to be part of that.
Yeah, that's right. I'm not so sure.
Right.
Now, I mean, depends on, you're saying when are they going to start? So it kind of depends on who they is. So
Well,
individual property owners may start at any time. In terms of larger community types of approaches, that needs to have a larger community kind of discussion.
okay, so is there someone doing those? Because you're doing all these studies. I guess who's doing the studies, the vulnerability studies?
So in terms of the Stinson Arc, the planning department is working on that study right now.
Right. And
Yeah.
so the study, and then is it going to be the ARC that then would decide what they're going to implement, or does the county have any part in this?
Well, the Stinson Arc is going to lay out a few different options. I don't think that the county is necessarily going to make a decision about what to do next right away. I think that needs to be a community conversation. And of course, there's lots of stakeholders that are involved with that. So that just provides information to have a conversation, but hopefully it'll be a well-informed conversation.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Kirk.
How do the deed restrictions work in the case of a community or HOA? So I guess the Stinson Seadrift Lagoon or the Stinson Seadrift rock wall. Like, how would that sort of actually apply when something seems more like a shared resource that's across a broader entity like an HOA?
So it would apply to whoever the applicant is. So if the
Let me.
HOA,
I was asking specifically about armoring, where you're usually sort of doing the armoring as such or not entirely. So sorry, I was asking specifically about the armoring question.
yeah. So I mean, Stinson Beach is a special because there was a, back in the 80s or whatever, there was a huge lawsuit about that and that kind of thing. So that's a little bit of a special case. But otherwise, I mean, if it's an HOA, that's the applicant, then the HOA would be responsible. If it's a private property owner, that's the applicant, then the private property owner would be responsible. So whoever the responsible party is the applicant.
I guess what I'm asking is your deed says you can't armor, but the HOA needs to armor the lagoon and the rock wall. I guess I don't understand how that plays out as the property owner, I guess.
So if the HOA is applying for a coastal development permit for a project that would be
Okay.
subject to these requirements, then they would be responsible for meeting the requirements.
Okay.
Yeah. Are there other questions? We've got some really good questions so far tonight. Thank you all so much. Appreciate it. We will be going through the meetings that we've had. We'll be doing a summary of what we've heard. We'll also be accepting comments. Hopefully you'll be able to get your comments to us before the end of the year. And then we'll be working on a schedule for the Planning Commission after we've gotten an opportunity to go through those comments and make some changes. So probably that's not going to be until like February, but please keep an eye on the website because we'll let you all know when that Planning Commission workshop is going to take place and when we upload the revised draft of this for all of your review. Kathleen.
Thanks, Jeremy. Listening to all my neighbors talk, I just want to suggest that the Seadrift HOA is paying attention. The Village Association is paying attention. We talk to each other and we have the ear of decision makers. So become involved with us. And that'll get you both information and opportunities.
Yeah, we had a pretty good turnout, I thought, at your meeting, actually. Kristin, how many did we get?
D60?
Yeah, 50 or 60 people. So that was good. The word's getting out. The more you can help us get the word out, the better. So I really appreciate it. Really appreciate all of you being here tonight. Are there any other questions? Okay. Well, if there are, you can always reach out to us and we'll do our best to answer them. Otherwise, hoping that we're going to get some good written comments from all of you, and really hope to be able to see you at the Planning Commission hearing early next year. We'll let you know when that's going to happen.
Julie has her hand raised.
Julie, yes.
Hi there. Thank you so much. I have a question about septic in the Seadrift area.
Mhm.
There was mention about a possible community septic system, or is that a different area of Stinson?
I don't know. I mean, I've heard that that idea has been around for a while. I don't know if it's got legs. And it's something that, the district would be looking at. There have also been various attempts to protect private septic systems as well, ways of building those so that they're not so susceptible to effects of flooding. So there's a number of different options. But yeah, I mean, what I would recommend is you reach out to the water district and ask them about any plans or thoughts they have about that.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Okay, well, thank you so much. Great questions tonight. Looking forward to your comments, and we will be seeing you at the Planning Commission hearing. Thank you.
Good night. Thank you all for coming.